My name is Ashwin Walker, and my project is over why euthanasia should be legal. If you're lying on your deathbed, aching in pain, it's been 5 years of the same routine, with pills and no sight of getting better, how would you feel? Would you want a way out, or to keep fighting a battle you're going to lose in the end? Euthanasia is the painless death of a patient dealing with an incurable disease to end pain and suffering from prolonging. While this is the end of one person's life, it allows dignity to reside for someone to go out the way they feel is right. I have read over several studies and laws addressing this issue to better be able to provide information in an accurate manner, but also share basis for why euthanasia should be more legal and widespread. Euthanasia can be viewed from an ethical view, but also in the form of practicality, to allow the perspective that legalizing it will allow a person to die on their own terms, allow the freeing up of health resources, and it's also possible to regulate euthanasia. While we now understand the concept that surrounds euthanasia, we can dive right into the ethical aspect of it. While many people have a hard time with the moral and ethical view of assisted killing of a patient, their death would be their choice and on their terms. As Dr. Maisie M., part of San Juan Unified School District, would state, our human rights should have the natural extension of patients' rights, allowing them to decide the value of life and death for them. Opponents in which argue from a more religious point of view say that life is God's gift and sanctity of life is needed for our country, as even our founding fathers would want self-preservation. Yet to be considered in continuing the life of a patient, it could be looked as, by law, unethical in medical philosophy, going against the patient's wishes and their decisions. Journalist Paul Goodman writes too, many of the patients who request this suffering are in extreme pain and illness. Forcing the continuing of such awful life conditions could also be taken as morally wrong. The overall thing in regards to euthanasia is felt with allowing a patient their choice to die. They feel like they are able to die with a sense of dignity. Sir Patrick Stewart, a Dignity for Dying patron, argues, we have no control over how we arrive in this world, but at the end of life we should have control over how we leave it. Altogether, death can be considered to be very private too. With no harm to others, who has the right to interfere? As the government tends to put laws on euthanasia, as it is a controversial topic, many feel that since this decision is personal to the family and patient, the government shouldn't have a say. There is no harm to anyone else. Precautions would have to be met to enable a person to even reach the requirements for a patient to make a decision. And considering that death should be its own choice, I think it's important to consider that death, for many people, may not even be considered a bad thing, that this is just a social construct of our society. We tend to regard death with such a heavy heart, but also in an unacceptable and awful context based on moral, religious, and outside views. Because reality is, most people don't want to die. And saying most people don't want to die, they probably have not been through the bad quality of life one may be living and asking for euthanasia. Is this to be held as a wrong view because they have a different point of view and experiences? Violation of autonomy is a giving factor in the poor view of death too. But where would this be violated if someone was asking for their life to be taken for greater purpose of not being in pain? As the ethical view of euthanasia is constantly up for debate, there's more practical view that can be looked at. A different approach about euthanasia and establishing its legality should consider how this can actually free up hospital resources. In studies shown and done by Dr. Emanuel and others, there can be an estimated cost savings of about $627 million in 1995 dollars. As this is only 0.7% of U.S. healthcare expenditures, it's a lot of money that can be put out towards caring for another life with the expectancy to live. Some argue, though, this point of view is still infringing on the value of life and how really freeing up resources would create the perspective of abuse on the matters will cause people to feel like they are a burden if they do not follow through with euthanasia. Yet, in reality, euthanasia would not be proposed and something brought about likely. And not everyone could go through with the process of euthanasia just by asking for it, so they do not burden others. Many long policies and jurisdictions would have to be met before doing so to weed out those that are doing it for this reason. This can take us to our next point, that while freeing of resources is a more practical argument, it's not usually suggested. We can open our perspective to a more commonly known point of view that euthanasia can be regulated if it were to be enacted and help put people's minds at ease. This is already done here in the US. Euthanasia can still be taken with structure and regulation. While this would be difficult, it would consist of things like having patients be evaluated by a psychologist to make sure they render a proper mental state. Also, the good care was taken leading up to the patient's request. Other factors, too, before allowing a patient to take this course. Some argue that euthanasia is impossible to regulate, as it would not be possible to draft the kind of regulations that would prevent the abuse of euthanasia, as some may even have bad intentions with this. Although having regulations are a good place to start, and better than not having rules in place at all. Having no rules would not prevent this from happening when it is illegal. Seeing the regulation part of euthanasia now allows a full, vivid view of what could be in place if euthanasia was established as legal. In summary, euthanasia, while controversial, can have beneficial factors and viewpoints that are realistic and still ethically sound, which is why we need to push for it to be more widespread, as it allows a person to die on their own terms, the cost-effectiveness and freeing up of hospital resources for other patients, and how allowing euthanasia can be regulated and structured. Euthanasia hopefully would not be a decision we'd ever have to face, although if you were terminally ill and soon to die anyways, ask yourself, would you really want to suffer or go out with peace? Thank you.